Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today and taking time out of your busy schedules to learn a little bit more about our topic for this afternoon's webinar, or I guess if you're on the West Coast, it would be still morning. But today we're going to be focusing on force, fraud, and coercion. So my name is Christine Commerce. I am the program director for the Alliance to End Human Trafficking. We are a survivor-informed organization that works to end this atrocity by providing educational resources, giving presentations, raising awareness, and engaging in advocacy across the nation. We also support survivors of human trafficking in healing and thriving through financial support to our member houses and providing educational scholarships. The purpose of our webinars are to educate participants on this issue so they will leave with actionable ways to help identify ways that victims the way the victims are victimized and safeguard our communities and its members. Our webinars are free, but donations are always appreciated. So if you'd like to support our cause, you can donate and find more information about our organization at alliance2endhumantrafficking.org. And please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared. It will also be posted on our YouTube channel, where you can find our past webinars on many other topics surrounding human trafficking. At the end of this presentation, you will be given a chance to ask some questions from our presenters. You will not be able to do a live Q&A, but you can put your questions in the Q&A box. So please join me in welcoming our esteemed guest today. First, I'd like to introduce Danny Pinter, Esquire, who serves as the Chief Legal Officer and Director of the National Center on Sexual Exploitation Law Center. In this role, Danny leads NCOSE's legal advocacy strategy and oversees its litigation department, appellate advocacy, and public policy work. Danny speaks regularly on a variety of exploitation topics with a special focus on protecting youth in a digital age and legal remedies for survivors of exploitation and abuse. Danny appeared in the 60 Minutes Australian documentary Inside Andrew Tate's Cult That Breeds Toxic Masculinity, among many other media appearances, and a sought-after legal expert on sex trafficking issues, where she's been interviewed by the New York Times, USA Today, ABC News, and many other national media outlets. Our next guest is Marianne Thomas, PhD, and a survivor of human trafficking, behavioral psychologist, and founder of My Name, My Voice. With over 20 years of experience, she leads a national team of lived experience experts providing anti-trafficking education and consultation. A sought-after speaker, Dr. Thomas has presented at leading conferences, including Shared Hope's Just Conference. Her work centers on survivor leadership, trauma-informed care, and systems change. Through her story and expertise, she equips communities to fight trafficking with insight, empathy, and action. So please join me in welcoming our esteemed guests, and we're going to kick it off by having Danny lead us off into some of the work that she's doing and how this all plays a role in human trafficking.
Thank you so much, Christine. I'm so happy to be here and good to see my good friend Marianne Thomas as well. So this is a great day to discuss this issue, and it's an important issue to talk about. So I work with the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, NCOSE. We're based in DC, and the focus of our work, which is in policy, advocacy, and litigation, is to cause top-down change, right? We want mass scale prevention. The different endeavors we take on are to hopefully cause a ripple effect so that we can end sexual exploitation, right, in this country and hopefully internationally. So when we take a case, we are looking at how that case will impact the most people and the most survivors as possible. So that's what makes us a little different from other organizations or other law firms who do great work and are extremely necessary. But so, for example, one of our cases is against Pornhub, and it's a class action case on behalf of all children exploited on that site. And so we picked that case because we thought that would have a massive impact on the entire pornography industry writ large. And it's a class action that will hopefully affect a lot of children. So that's the kind of litigation that we do. And I'm so excited to talk about force, fraud, and coercion today because when whoever the decision maker is in a case, whether it's a criminal case or a civil case, if the decision maker, which it could be a judge or a jury, doesn't understand the Trafficking Victims Protection Act and all that it covers, what gets filled in is sort of their own understanding of trafficking, which can be influenced by culture and movies, right? And so if someone doesn't know anything about trafficking, then they might think the movie Taken is the only thing that trafficking looks like, right? That's what it looks like in their mind. And if this case doesn't fit that mold, then, the legal jargon may go over their head, right? And they're just not convinced from the beginning. And so it's our job, and I see this webinar as a part of that, of educating society and educating culture on our very strong trafficking laws, which are encompassed in the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. So that statute is written very broadly, intentionally, because Congress wanted to cover all of the ways that traffickers defraud, force, and coerce their victims to engage in commercial sex. And I use the term commercial sex because that is the term that is used in the statute. So it doesn't just say prostitution, it says commercial sex. And that's, again, intentional to cover any time sex is commercialized, because whenever someone is being exploited sexually for money, that is commercial sex, and that is a part of sex trafficking. And Congress was very intentional to cover all of that because we know that traffickers don't operate in a vacuum. They're looking to exploit their victims in as many ways as they can and in whatever way makes money. So, for example, through pornography, that's commercial sex. By recording a victim in sex acts against their will, that is a sex trafficking act, even if there is not, a sex buyer in the room, for example. So really quickly, I just want to run through some features of the statute because I just want to lay that foundation of how broad and everything it covers. So the heart of sex trafficking, the criminalization of sex trafficking, is Section 1591, which says whoever knowingly recruits, entices, harbors, transports, provides, obtains, advertises, maintains, patronizes, or solicits by any means a person in reckless disregard of the fact that that person will be caused to engage in a commercial sex act by means of force, fraud, and coercion. So all of those terms, transporting, harboring, combined with this language will be caused, that's showing future tense. And so the courts have interpreted that, and that was Congress's intention, that, for example, transporting a person for the purpose of trafficking, at the point of transferring that person, the trafficking statute has been violated, right? And so that's important because we want to be able to prosecute these crimes. We want law enforcement to disrupt these crimes and prosecute these crimes and rescue victims, and not be deterred by the fact that, like, we need to let the victim be harmed before we take action, right? Otherwise we won't be able to catch the bad guy. We don't want that to happen. So that's part of why that's written that way, is we want to be able to disrupt and stop traffickers and hold them accountable at the point where they were transporting or harboring someone with the intention of trafficking them. And now, of course, you'll have to show that they were going to use force, fraud, and coercion. And that's where the cases have said that, a modus operandi, if the prosecutor can show that this trafficker operates in the same way every time, then that can support that they were going to operate that way that time, right? And that's consistent with criminal law in other cases. And similarly, if a trafficker brags or makes incriminating statements publicly, which is not is not as like, you would think that never happens. It actually happens a lot. So those statements can be used to show their intent to cause this person to be trafficked. So I just wanted to highlight that to show, like, how broad this is and all of the activity that is encompassed by the Trafficking Act. So, and quickly, when it comes to a minor, no force, fraud, or coercion is necessary. So the way the traffic is written, it's either causing a person, an adult person, to engage in a commercial sex act by means of force, fraud, and coercion, or causing a minor to engage in a sex act. So if a minor is engaging in a sex act, trafficking is occurring. And when we look back at those solicit, entice, patronize, so even if a child is engaging in a sex act without a third-party trafficker involved, the buyer is trafficking that child, right? The buyer is soliciting or patronizing that child. And buyers can and should be prosecuted. I'd love to see more of that. And we never want to see, again, my goal would be we never see child prostitute or teenage sex worker or language like that, because that doesn't exist. Anyone under 18 who's engaged in a commercial sex act is a trafficking victim, even if they don't identify as such. Under our US law, that is the case. And quickly, I'll just note that that's true even in other countries. So if an American travels to another country where maybe they don't protect their children, the American is held to the American standard. So Americans cannot go to another country and sexually abuse a child just because that country is not protecting their children. So I just want to emphasize that, because the United States, unfortunately, is the #1 sex buyer of the world's exploited children. So we have covered that, and that is illegal, and we can prosecute those crimes. So force, fraud, and coercion. That's when you're causing someone, if you cause an adult to engage in a commercial sex act with those three, using one or a combination of those those means of causing them to engage in it, then trafficking has occurred. So force is easy, right? That's physical violence or physically causing someone, right? Holding someone down, physically causing them. That's easy. And what about fraud? Fraud is deception. Fraud is lies. So an example of that is luring someone under false pretenses. So advertising a modeling job or advertising some kind of work, and then the person shows up and they're actually being expected to engage in prostitution, for example. That's fraud. That's lying to them. So anytime a trafficker lies to their victim about what they're asking them to do, or the circumstances, or so I'll give you some examples. So circumstances or what will be expected of them. So for example, there is a famous or infamous case of trafficking in the pornography industry. It was by a very popular production company called Girls Do Porn. Girls Do Porn was a porn site, one of the most popular porn sites in the world. And what they did is sometimes they falsely advertised modeling, but often they did tell the women that it would be a porn shoot, but they lied about the sex acts the women would be involved in, and they lied about the distribution. So they told them, "Oh, this is just for a private buyer. This is not going online," when they had every intention of blasting online as far as possible. So even that fraud and that deception was trafficking, as it should be, and that everyone in that trafficking ring is now finally prosecuted and in federal prison, as they should be. But that's what I mean when I say fraud or deception. These women were lured and enticed under these false pretenses, and so when they engaged in those commercial sex acts, they were being trafficked. And coercion is the hardest piece. What is coercion? I think most people don't understand what it is, but the statute does define it, and I'll just read the definition for you. So the term coercion means threats of serious harm or physical restraint or any scheme, plan, or pattern intended to cause a person to believe that failure to perform an act would result in serious harm or physical restraint or abuse or threatened abuse of the legal process. And then I was talking about how broadly the statute is written. Serious harm is also defined in the statute very broadly. It means any harm, whether physical, non-physical, including psychological, financial, or reputational harm, that is sufficiently serious under all the surrounding circumstances to compel a reasonable person of the same background in the same circumstances to perform or continue to perform the commercial sex activity to avoid the harm. So that's so important, because most people, I think, they understand, okay, threats of violence is coercion, but it's not just threats of violence. It's threats, financial harm. we're going to bankrupt you, or I'm going to steal all your money. Threats of reputational harm. And there was a very high profile case recently where I think the jury did not understand this. The alleged trafficker in that case threatened often to reveal pornographic images of the victims to shame them, send it to, their child's father, send it to their family, post them online. That's a threat of reputational harm. At the moment that that trafficker threatened to release, revenge pornography of this person, if they didn't engage in the Commercial Sex Act, that is an act of trafficking at that moment, under the statute. And so that's why it's so important that we talk about these things so that we can get into the public consciousness, this understanding of what these mean and how important it is, because what coercion is an overcoming of someone's will. That person does not want to engage in the Commercial Sex Act, and the trafficker is using means to overcome their will, to threaten them in some way, to make them feel that if they don't engage in the Commercial Sex Act, some harm will come to them. And that is deeply wrong and deeply harmful to people, not to mention exploitive and exploitive for profit. One of the most odious things that we have determined could ever happen is exploiting someone in this way for profit. So I will stop there. I think I've probably gone over my time, but certainly happy to answer questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Danny. And I think you made some great points. And that's why education and awareness is so important. I think a lot of people may not realize that pornography can be also a form of sex trafficking. So good to keep in mind. I do have a question real quick before we move on to Marianne, because you did mention, with the investigations and, not wanting to wait till someone is harmed. I hear about some of the investigations that take place, and we know there's so little convictions for human trafficking. So I don't know if this is a double question, but why do some of these investigations go on for so long when people are currently being victimized, right? And then, what is the challenges with getting some of these convictions? Is it the lack of understanding, basically, of force, fraud, and coercion?
Yeah, I think that actually is it. So, if you think about the criminal justice system in America, I think this is a good thing. But the way it is designed is all is stacked against the prosecutor, and the whole system is designed to protect the accused. So the prosecutor has to show beyond a reasonable doubt. So there can't even be a kernel of doubt in the jury's mind for them to win. So that's in every investigator's mind and every prosecutor's mind. We also have a system that prosecutors' success is measured by their conviction rate. So prosecutors are highly de-incentivized to take risks, right? Like they want to pick the strongest case as possible. If there's any chance they won't get a conviction, they're very deterred from taking such a case. So that, and we could think about myriad ways to reform that, but public education can actually fill in those gaps, because the more confidence that the prosecutors have that the evidence available to them will be convincing to a jury, then the more they will feel the confidence to take this case and the confidence that they will get a conviction.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. All right. So from now, we're going to go ahead and hand it over to Marianne. Go ahead and take it from here, Marianne.
Hey, y'all, my name's Marianne. And I mean, Danny, thank you so much. I learn from you every single time I hear you speak. I was taking notes furiously, some things that I had not thought of that you mentioned. And then also because I want to highlight some things that Danny said for all of you. So my name is Marianne Thomas. I'm a survivor of human trafficking. I'm also been working in the field with other survivors of human trafficking for pretty close to 20 years now. So I want to talk about those things that Danny told you, explained to you about force, fraud, coercion, and public opinion from my side of the table, what it looks like over here. She mentioned that, juries, even judges are swayed by their lack of understanding of human trafficking, right? The movie Taken, great movie, fantastic movie, enjoyed it. that is not what trafficking domestically in the US looks like, right? And so it gives the wrong example, not that it's not happening like that, just that's not typical, right? And so we're missing the mark. That doesn't just hurt court cases, though. That also hurts victims and survivors while they're being harmed. Because what happens is, while people are watching the media, or heaven help us, those great things on social media that say, like, if there's a zip tie on your car, you're going to get trafficked, or if somebody puts $20 under your windshield wiper, listen, times are tough. Put $20 under my windshield wiper, I'll take it, right? But they're telling us the wrong information, because that's not how traffickers are approaching people, right? It's not a good business model for them. Because if you do that to me in a Target parking lot, first of all, I'm going to fight back, right? I'm going to scream, I'm going to yell, I'm going to do all kinds of things. And people are going to look and take note of that and call police and do a lot of things. That's not a good business model for a trafficker who wants to take their victim and be able to use their victim over and over and over and over. Not like a kidnapper who just wants to snatch them and hurt them for a time period, right? Not like that. Trafficker is thinking long term, right? How can I make money from this person long term? And so a better business model is to do what Danny talked about: force, fraud, coercion. Pretend I'm your friend. Pretend that I want to get to know you. Hey, approach you on social media. Hey, you're so pretty. You're so nice. I'd love to hang out with you. You have a great sense of style. Let's go hang out at the mall. Let's do this. Your family doesn't understand you. Maybe you should come hang out with me. You could come stay with me. That would be okay, right? And they do this gentle push and pull that actually makes it look like the victim now has walked away willingly to go be with the trafficker, because the trafficker convinces the victim that the reality is different than what it really is, right? And so because of that, when we're pushing that social media, that look for the zip tie, look for the $20, we're missing the mark. We're not telling the people to look for the right thing. If we teach them, hey, watch your social media. If you're a single parent, don't trust anybody who says they like kids, right? Get everybody background screened. All of those things. Don't post pictures of your kids, please and thank you, right? There are a lot of things we could be telling you that traffickers are actually looking for, but the message of the experts is getting lost in all of the loudness of what's being pushed. And those are those false narratives. So I wanted to say that actually harms victims also, that we stay stuck in trafficking because the general public is looking for something else. The general public is looking for those people who are tied up and chained up, right? They're not looking for someone who was trafficked in plain sight, who was showing up out in public, who you would have seen at the grocery store, who you would have seen out in the community, right? They're not looking for that. And so it's harder to be seen by the public, and then also to be believed when we do finally come forward. And then Danny also hit on that commercial aspect, right? That sticks in some people's heads, because commercial sounds like money, right? If I want to buy something, I go to a store and I pay my money and I get whatever that item is. But when you're selling things that are not made to be sold, illicit things like people, right? When you're selling people, it doesn't have to be just money. There are many ways to sell a person. And so often, especially our vulnerable kids out there, people in the streets, people with criminal records, people in the LGBTQ community, people with any developmental delays, I could keep going on, right? There are people who are more vulnerable than others, right? And they go to them, and instead of trying to get the money aspect, it's a simple thing. Are you hungry? Do you need a place to sleep tonight? And that is the commercial trade. The commercial trade is actually that object or that item, or safety. We see it in the homeless community a lot, where it is safer, please see by air quotes, right? It is safer to be with a male out in the streets because maybe he'll protect you from the other people out there, right? So that could also be the trade-off. So that's important to remember. In speaking about how laws should be tougher, I don't know if Danny, if you're even aware of this, but here in Florida, we had Jonathan Martin pushed Senate Bill 1804 to make the trafficking of children a capital punishment. And so that's, I think, is that the strictest one in the country then? I thought so. Okay, so go Florida. I'm pretty proud of my state for pushing something like that. I'd like to get that momentum and keep it going forward with a few other things to help us along. And then let's talk about force, fraud, and coercion, because that's really what this is about. I just wanted to highlight a few things first. When you are the victim, right? Victims don't necessarily come forward because the trafficker's whole job is to convince me that I'm where I expect to be, that I don't have other choices, and that there's really nothing else for me to do. And when you are selling a person, there is also incentive to make sure that person is presentable to the public, right? Now, lots of us got beat up, lots of us got harmed, but also lots of us got our hair done, our nails done, things like that to make us presentable out in public, to get top dollar for us, right? And so they use all of that against us. You're here, you're doing this, you're this kind of person. I gave you this, I did that for you. How are you going to turn on me now? If you have children, I will harm your children, or a good mother would do this to provide for her children, right? They use all of those. It feels like it's subtle. It feels like it's subtle when you're in it because it feels sort of normal, right? If you hear the same message day after day, no matter what that message is, you believe it. And so when you're hearing that message day after day, you believe that there is no other option. You believe that this is the only thing you can do. And when you do come forward, just like you've heard already, quite often people don't believe the stories we tell, right? It sounds horrific. It sounds, what are you saying to me, right? Are you nuts? Are you telling me that really happens right here in America, right? It's really hard for people to believe. And traffickers do a very good job of pretending there's somebody else in front of different people, right? There are traffickers that you see out in the streets that you look at and you say, oh, that's a scary looking individual, right? That individual looks a little scary. I would take a wide berth around that person. But there are also traffickers that are sitting in our homes, in our neighborhoods, right next door, extorting people online, selling people in person, and they look like you and I, right? They look like the person next door because they are. They don't have criminal records because they have not yet been caught. I always laugh when some organization tells me, oh, we do background screens. We check for all of that. And I say, oh, that's great, because that's only for the criminals, right? The ones who got caught. It's not for the ones who haven't been caught yet. There's not a screen for that, right? And so that is the truth, though. There's not a screen to find out who the bad guy is. We're not teaching people well because we promote like the boogeyman and look for stranger danger and all of those things. And really, the new reality is that the person who wants to harm you or your children is going to come at you in a much gentler way to begin with, especially here in the US, because it's a better business model, because it makes law enforcement think you were there on your own, because it makes your family think you were there on your own, because it makes you think you were there on your own. You start to believe the lie yourself. You start to believe that's really what you are and what your life is. And you really might not know a way out. And unless we start telling the truth about what trafficking looks like, it's really hard to identify victims for the victims and have them also reach out for services, right? That can be really difficult. And I just want to say one thing. I say buying a person always. And the reason that I say that is because you cannot buy sex. That's right. That's an act. You're buying the person for the time, because no matter what, please see air quotes again, the agreement was, right? The contract for that service was, the buyer has all of the control in that moment. The buyer controls whether or not money exchanges hands. The buyer controls what acts take place. The buyer controls if the victim even leaves the room after that. Okay, the buyer has all of the control in that. So I always say that they're buying a person. I have heard other survivors say they're renting a person for a specific period of time. And so that's basically my thoughts on force, fraud, and coercion, that in it doesn't feel like there's something wrong all the time. We're very much convinced that life is normal, it might be hard, but it's normal, right? I think I'm open for questions, Christine.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Marianne. I appreciate it. I think you made some really great points. I saw a graphic once, and you talk about the scary white van, right? And it shows like a cell phone is like, this is the new white van, right? And that's what we need to be teaching our kids.
Can I jump
And
in
so,
really quick, and just because I learned so much too every time I hear you, Marianne, and I'm so glad you dialed in on the commercial aspect, because I left out like that, even defined in the statute. It's defined as the exchange of anything of value by any person, anything of value. So if, drugs are of value, are the images of value, is it a place to stay, food, that is all contemplated as well. You're dead on the money, correct about that. And one of the most disturbing cases recently, and it kind of ties into what you're saying, Christine, with the phone, is on the Roblox app, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen the headlines about the horrible exploitation. Predators were exchanging with kids Robux. So it was the in-game currency for, like sexual images of themselves. Like, so there you have the commercial sex act right there with this like virtual game currency. It's just so sick and disturbing. But I just thought it eerily tied in right to what you were saying, Marianne.
yeah, absolutely. And we see that even with other games as well, with V-Bucks for, some of like that Roblox might be something more the girls play, where boys want to play, some of the other games, and they want to earn their V-Bucks in the game, and for Fortnite, and same thing, same exact thing. They're being exchanged, sending explicit photos in exchange for those V-Bucks.
And they're doing it right under their parents' noses. Parents are home. They think they're safe playing a game. They have no idea. Kid walks into the bathroom with their phone for a second. And we don't really train our boys that well, right? We've gotten better at telling our young girls, watch out for all these things. These are your private spots, right? We do that for girls pretty good, but we're not as good at doing it for boys. And so, that's where the target is. It's easy to target little boys then.
Yeah, and teenage boys. And let me tell you, I could tell you so many stories about my son alone. Like, we need to have these conversations with our boys as well. Like, it's happening, and it's happening online for sure. So I want to just switch gears just a little bit, because we talk about they're targeting our kids online, right? And they're pretending to be their friends, and they're offering stuff. I want to talk a little bit about trauma bonding. So let's talk a little bit about relationships. So whether they, develop a relationship online, or they may meet them in person. And we've seen cases, and it could be a boyfriend, girlfriend, husband. Um, and some of these are very high profile cases as well, where we see this trauma bonding. And unfortunately, we even see that some of these trauma bonds are so strong that even when the kids are rescued out of this situation, they run right back to their trafficker. So can you talk a little bit about the trauma bonding, or the dependency that makes this coercion so difficult to recognize from the outside and from a legal standpoint?
Go ahead, Marianne, you go first.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say it's very similar to what we saw in domestic violence, right? Human trafficking is a newer terminology. We're still studying it. We're still developing the laws to combat it, all of those things. But domestic violence has been known about for longer, and that's what we always saw with domestic violence, right? Women were returning to their abusers. And people struggled with that. Law enforcement struggled with that. Society struggled with that. It's the same thing with human trafficking. It's like I said, when they are doing that push pull, that trafficker is luring you in. That's the whole thing, is they are manipulating your mind. They are changing the narrative. They are giving you false narratives. And if you isolate a person from all their safe people, you pull them away, even if it's emotionally, you've pulled them away from all their safe people, you control the narrative. A person will believe what they hear repeatedly, right? This is used in all types of things that we won't get into right now, but it's used for other reasons to help change people's minds, right? You can control everything a person does if you have them isolated, right? You control when they eat, you control when they sleep, you control what they hear, you control what they watch, you control what they wear. And eventually that's all they know. It becomes our normal. And so when you take us out of that, we don't know what to do, right? I once sat with a girl who had been abused for many, many years. And she knows I tell this story. She gave me permission. And I asked her, we pulled up to a drive-through. And I said, hey, what do you want to eat? Right? I think it was like, I don't know, Chick-fil-A, something like it. I tried to make it an easy one, right? What do you want to eat? And she said, I don't know. And it wasn't because she just didn't know what she wanted. It's because she had not made a choice for herself in years, right? That is what happens. They control so much of what we do that we don't even know what else there is. In psychology, there's a term called learned helplessness. We've all seen the elephants at the zoo, right? Or at the circus. I love elephants. And they have this chain around their leg, right? And what happens is when that elephant is a baby, they put that big heavy chain on the elephant's leg, right? And the baby tries to pull its leg out and the baby elephant cannot pull away. That elephant grows up into a big giant elephant, same chain. The big giant elephant could very easily lift its leg and pull that chain out of the ground and go be free. However, it doesn't, because its brain has told it, you can't pull that chain. You tried a million times, you can't pull that chain. So eventually they quit trying. Same thing happens in people. You try to get away, you try to look for something else, even if it's only like looking it up online, right? Or asking for help or telling one person, hey, this is something that's going on in my life. Does that sound normal to you? You try and you get put away, you get brushed aside, your trafficker, your abuser takes over, and all you know is it's easier to sit here. And leaving, we don't talk about this enough, is no walk in the park either, right? Because that's when all the hard stuff really begins. It is hell being trafficked, but starting your life over and rebuilding everything and undoing all of the mess that was made in your brain and relearning who you are and what you are and what you like and all of those things and putting all those pieces together for yourself takes time and intentional effort, and it takes service providers who wrap around and do a lot of help to heal some things, especially attorneys like my friend, right, who do things to help us get whole with justice or to repair our past so that we can have futures. All of those things that we have to do after we leave that we also don't talk about. And so when you're sitting there and you're being abused, but you look at what happens if you walk out the door, that looks insurmountable. It looks impossible. It looks like it's never going to happen. And it feels easier to stay where you are.
That's brilliant, Marianne. Yeah, and you know, the traffickers know exactly what they're doing. A very famous alleged trafficker talked about explicitly, like he would teach his techniques to other men, and he would specifically say the isolation is key. He would say, you know, move her away. If she has a strong friend group or family, that's going to be in your way. Every relationship other than you is in your way. You've got to get rid of those relationships so that her whole world depends on you. Her happiness depends on you. And then there's even like, you know, not even just trying to leave becomes difficult, they'll make everything difficult, right? And that's intentional. Like upsetting them in the smallest way becomes so awful that, you know, the victim stops resisting even the smallest things. And that's intentional because they can't even imagine like disagreeing with the trafficker about what they're doing that day. Leaving is like a whole nother story. And it's systematic brainwashing. It's intentional systematic brainwashing. Um, I'm so glad you said domestic violence because it's the exact kind of relationship we see in domestic violence, but we also see in cult dynamics. Very often, the trafficker creates a cult dynamic where we're a family, everyone in here is a family, we're all doing things together, they sell the dream, right? We're all working together for this dream, this cooperative dream. And this becomes the social circle of the victim, right? This is their society. What they care about is what is their standing in the group now. They're no longer able to see, you know, what regular life looks like outside the group. They're living in the universe of this family, this trafficking ring, and those group dynamics can be extremely powerful in reinforcing the traffickers, you know, commands and beliefs, and almost becomes like a religiosity of how, you know, we behave in this group. And specifically for trauma bonding, that's a specific term that relates to, you know, clinically in your brain. So for example, the trafficker will often sometimes there's a legitimate dispute, or sometimes it's a completely staged dispute. So they'll pick something to be mad at the victim about and create such a huge scene, even if it's not violence, it's screaming, yelling, right? Like they've built a relationship with the person. So very often they've told this person something, all the things they've never heard in their life, like they're beautiful, smart, special, right? So there's already an emotional attachment. Then we stage this manufactured, horrible emotional scene, which affects your brain, right? A traumatizing scene. And then when the trafficker makes up, and you see this in domestic violence all the time, oh, I love you, I'll never do it again, right? The husband, right? Oh, when you make up, that solidifies a extremely strong bond. And every time that happens, the bond strengthens. So from an outsider perspective, you think, well, he said and did all those horrible things, but you don't realize that like the more horrible it was, it the coming together and making up means that's how much more powerful and strong that bond will be. So it's and you can see the brain changing from those interactions. It's really, really powerful. And so I think our statute does contemplate those things when we talk about psychological harm, because the victim being concerned with devastating psychological impacts from the trafficker's anger is certainly psychological harm, and we see physical restraint. We're getting at that isolation. I do wish we that our statute encompassed more of that isolation in the language specifically, but that's what the legislature was getting at there.
So when it seems like the victim is consenting to some of these things that the trafficker is asking them to do, right? Is that one of the challenges that prosecutors face in proving these force, fraud, and coercion in court?
Of course,
Is
which, and like as Marianne said, like the business model of like chaining someone up who's like beat up and unhealthy is very weak business model, because they want as many buyers willing to engage as possible. And there's many buyers, as depraved as a universe of people as they they're not interested in some woman who's chained up and half dead. They want someone who's playing like they're willing and having a great, fantastic time. They want someone who looks great, sounds great, and is also fanning their ego. That's usually what this is about, is fanning their ego. And they need someone who's going to sit there and tell them they're so happy to be there and they had the best time of their life. Well, how do you get someone to that point? You're going to have to trap them in this psychological prison of really brainwashing. And so that, you know, they also want the woman to be like going out and doing all the work, to be honest, too. They want her going out and finding the buyers and doing everything essentially. So that doesn't really work for someone who they have to make sure isn't fleeing every second. So that's like every trafficker is trying to accomplish this goal of having this woman look great and put on the part and come and go. Yet every time a defense attorney is going to say, Well, she went to the grocery store, so she wasn't really trafficked, right? Every time. So that's like exactly what the prosecutors are up against and why it's like so important we're talking about this right now.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to go ahead and switch over to our Q&A. And I know one of the questions, so let me ask this question first, and then we'll go into the first question. How would you say coercion differs between labor trafficking and sex trafficking contexts?
Well, I'm not a labor trafficking expert. If Marianne knows more than me, please. There are some differences. There's like some more specifics about abusive legal process and like immigration documents and things like that. But I think it's essentially the same. I know the language differs slightly, but I'm not an expert, so.
Did you have anything to add, Marianne? Someone had asked basically if the the force, fraud, and coercion also applies to minors of labor trafficking as well, which I know there's been some it's not always been clear to me either.
And yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I'm sorry. Labor trafficking is really complicated. Like you could be like it's its own expertise. So unfortunately, I'm just not capable of
Okay.
answering that.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. When I send a follow-up email, I will include my contact information. And so if any of your questions do not get answered today, please feel free to reach out to me. And I'd be happy to find those answers for you. From what I understand, there is a difference between minor labor trafficking victims and sex trafficking victims. So where minors of sex trafficking do not need to prove that force, fraud, and coercion, it is different for minor victims of labor trafficking, from what I understand. But yes, we can definitely do a little bit more research if you'd like to get more information on that. All right, so let's see. So we have a question. Do we have research on grooming online and across state lines, or trafficking and exploitation by high profile individuals? I know there's a lot of research that's been done on online grooming. What about, is there a lot of research that you know of, Danny,
Yeah, so
on
there's
those
tons
issues?
of research on grooming. Please feel free to visit our website and sexualexploitation.org. We have a whole research department where we like compile this research on different topics, and grooming would be one. So you could see a bunch of studies, and we have some summaries there too. So there's a lot of research, like we know what grooming looks like and how it affects children, but the law is difficult on grooming because grooming involves like interpersonal reaction and conversations, which means it involves the First Amendment. So like, for example, there's not, well, there's some federal laws that get to grooming kind of a roundabout way in the child exploitation laws, but there's not like a specific grooming federal law, for example. But some states do have grooming laws, criminalizing grooming. It usually involves having sexually explicit conversations or providing pornography to a child, but the prosecutors have to prove with the intent to physically harm the child. And so that's really hard. Like they have to prove that there was an effort to ultimately meet the child, which we know a lot of times like these horrible groomers and predators do horrible things to kids, and they never intend to meet them. They don't have to meet them to hurt them. So this is actually like an emerging trend that our organization is thinking about a lot. And, are our laws really updated to this virtual world and this cyber world? And I don't think they are. I think there's some places to update that. There's a couple bills being contemplated right now, sort of in this space, the Guard AI Act and the LEAD Act, which get to sort of the AI chatbot grooming that's happening right now. So it's an emerging issue. And then across state lines always makes things easier for prosecutors. So transporting across state lines for the purposes of prostitution is an extremely old law that's still living strong because there was a recent conviction under that. So that's a great law because it's a simple thing. Prostitution's not legal. So transporting someone across state lines for the purposes of prostitution is a crime. And that's easy to prosecute because you don't have to get into the willingness or not willingness or intent or what it was all about. It's just, did you do that? It's a crime, which is great. So we have that, but obviously that doesn't quite work for grooming just yet.
Yeah, and I think we're always trying to play catch up, right? I mean, it's always something new, and especially with AI and emerging technologies, which I'm just going to give a quick plug. We will be having a session on at our national conference, April 15th through the 17th in Boston next year. But yeah, so I know there's been some legislation that's been presented on AI and so forth, and so yeah, trying to keep up is definitely a challenge. So I have another question. How does one report a predator if, for say, an example, an expat is exploiting or abusing a child in a different country? This is an actual case in Nicaragua. So Danny, I know you mentioned that you're still held accountable if you go to a different country, but if a person's in another country abusing a child, how is that? How does one report that? And I know there's also communication if you're a registered sex offender to local law enforcement, to at that country to let them know. But what if you're, not a registered sex offender, like Marianne said, it's, there's a first time for everything.
So it could be a couple things, depending, I'm not sure if I fully understand. So I'll answer a couple things. It could be if you're a United States citizen exploiting a child overseas sexually, that is a crime prosecutable in the United States. So the United States government could prosecute you. If you are a foreign national exploiting children in the United States, for example, that's trickier. It's not impossible, but you do have to now the United States government has to coordinate with the foreign country. And that's where things can become really difficult. For example, there's been massive sextortion schemes coming out of Nigeria, for example, where Nigerian citizens are going online and using Instagram and social media to target United States kids and then engaging in the sextortion schemes. I mean, it's even resulting in the death of American children while these people have never even stepped foot in the United States. So that's a very difficult current issue. So our federal government could likely do things, but it would require coordination with the foreign country as well. So, and it does happen. I think I know of a specific case where that, a child died from these sextortion schemes, and it was Nigerian nationals, and they were ultimately prosecuted in Nigeria for all of that. So I think that was a coordination between American federal government and the Nigerian federal government. So that can happen, but it just adds a level of complexity, of course. And being able to find the person in the first place is very difficult when it becomes this online space, right? There's so many ways to obfuscate where you're really from, but it is possible.
So, and I know a lot of countries have a national hotline, and I know like, the National Human Trafficking Hotline has a lot of different languages as well. Is that something they could also use to report if they suspect abuse or trafficking in a situation?
Yeah, so sorry, of course, the question was reporting. I mean, you can always report to FBI, which they have an online exploitation tip line, and they should and could coordinate with international agencies. But yes, you can report. There's a couple of Interpol can do things. So Interpol can do things reporting to Interpol they affect a large number of countries. The UK has a hotline for child exploitation. I think it's called the International. I can't remember. There's an ICMIC. There's a couple different. There's ICMIC International Center for Missing and Exploited Children. There's a Canadian Center for Missing. It's Canadian Center for Child Protection. I think it's CCCP, something like that. So even if let's say it's a country you don't know what it is, but you report to one of those international organizations, they often can refer you out. So can ours. So I think any hotline that's easiest to find, if it's our federal hotline, it's a European hotline, it's a Canadian hotline, do that report. And often if they can't help, they're already set up to coordinate with sister agencies in other countries, and they can help facilitate the reporting to the country of origin.
Thank you. Okay, so I have another question. There's a case where an adult daughter became a single mother and was forced, frauded and coerced by her parents to marry someone that had paid the parents, not her, money for her so that they could get a green card out of the fraudulent marriage. She believed that she had to play along to prove the marriage for about 3 years in order to keep the safety of her child. And once the green card was received, the parents were paid another amount and the buyer filed for divorce. One of the parents had a career in law enforcement and said they were breaking the law because there's really no laws against a situation like this where sex did not actually take place. Is that true? And is there awareness for situations like this that don't quite fall in the definition of paying for sex or labor work?
That's definitely criminal and it breaks myriad laws. So, first of all, immigration law. So that's like defrauding the federal government. I mean, green card fraud is a well-known and ancient fraud of which the United States government is more than capable of prosecuting. So that's certainly immigration fraudulent documents, like all kinds of things. It's hard for me to understand that sex never took place in the 3 years these person was married, so I guess maybe I don't know the full situation, but if any sex took place, I think there's an argument for sex trafficking. There's also laws against child marriage. I don't know if now maybe this person was over 18, sounds like could be adult daughter, yeah, over 18. So, very interesting. I mean, if there was any sex taking place, I would say that's obviously sex trafficking, because whenever immigration is involved, that's a pretty easy one for prosecutors to show coercion. It's very easy to show what was being exchanged, what was at stake. So there's clearly an exchange here, and someone was coerced against their will. So if there was any sex, it's sex trafficking, but it might even just be very easy to prosecute for immigration fraud.
Thank you. Yeah, we've heard about like mail order brides and all that, and I don't think a lot of people realize too. With I know was an adult, but child marriage is still legal in many states,
Yeah. Mhm.
and parents do,
Participate.
marry off their children to adult men, and that's maybe another topic, another webinar for another
Yeah.
day. But for something definitely to consider as well. Um, so I have it looks like a follow-up question asking that earlier question in response to Danny's points that Western buyers go to foreign countries to abuse kids because the country's laws are more lenient, but are held accountable if an American. But how do you press charges if they live in a foreign country, and what organization would intervene? So I think you kind of already answered that. I don't know if you have anything else to follow up, like coordinating with,
Even if
the
they live
different.
in a foreign country, I think the federal government can still prosecute them. I think the issue is more of like a will issue, like getting, because unfortunately, child exploitation is such an overwhelming, massive crime now that we don't have federal law enforcement does not have the resources to fully prosecute it. So, like, for example, they have priorities. And so they'll actually be like, we have a list this long of cases and we only have the resources to prosecute this many. So we have to only do the most egregious cases, for example, and the priorities may change, based on whoever's in charge at the time and things like that. But like for child exploitation online, for example, their priority is to and under violent assaults. So like even if they have an open and shut case of like a 12-year-old being, CSAM case, they're below the list because there's that many infants, for example, being, it's that horrible in terms of the scope of the problem. So while I think that likely the federal government could absolutely prosecute that person, I think the difficulty would really just be getting the will. So, the best way to do it is if there's lots of evidence and personal connections to people in law enforcement, you basically got to lobby them to take that seriously, because they probably will just have the disposition of like, he's not in our neighborhood, he's not our problem, unfortunately, even if technically they could prosecute that crime.
Thank you. Well, we are right out of time. I'm just going to show this last comment that by Ruby Peters. She said when we were talking about the force, fraud, and coercion with sex and labor trafficking that she has heard it varies state to state. And according to the Florida Medical Association continuing education information, minors do not have to prove force, fraud, or coercion for either sex or labor trafficking. So yeah, I'm not sure if I have a clear answer to that. I have heard other things as well. So we'll have to do a little bit of research, but maybe we can share that with the follow-up email that we'll be sending out with these resources, the recording. And Marianne or Danny, if you like to share any of your resources or web resources, I'm happy to share that in the follow-up email if you want to send that my way. And so I think we pretty much got to a lot of the questions from our audience, and I really appreciate your time and your expertise on this topic. Thank you so much for both of you being here today, and thank you to our audience for attending and learning more about this issue.
Thank you so much.
Have a great day.